the world of training, there is no shortage of ways to make your training harder, adding reps and sets, duration, intensity, but the best kept secret when it comes to your training progression might have been under our noses and between our ears the entire time. Well, yes, I'm talking about your body, my body, our bodies, and our minds, but it's not what you think, and it goes against some of the most common cycling advice that you've heard. Most cyclists use structured training to carefully add stress in a consistent and progressive way. But while progressive overload is an important component of cycling training, I know there are problems with this approach. So I'm setting out to find a better way to progress my training. What I came up with is an approach that I'm calling adaptive interval training. I'm gonna try it for 3 weeks. I'll be tracking my progress to see if I can beat a 10% per week progression. And I'm gonna do this starting now. Simply put, as you adapt to training, you need a larger and larger stimulus to drive further adaptations. And I'm sure you've all heard of the recommendation to never increase your weekly mileage by more than 10% over the previous week. But where did this advice actually come from? It turns out that the number has more to do with support than science. In 1980, Dr. Joan Ulyott, a US medical doctor and journalist, was the first person known to write about the 10% rule in her book. Joan's advice was specifically aimed at beginner runners and centered around her rule of tens, stating that by gradually increasing volume by only 10% per week, she was able to reduce her running-related injuries and enhance her performance. The rule was catchy and easy to remember, so it stuck. In reality, this is an oversimplistic guide that will not suit everyone, and in practical terms, if you follow this rule, you will miss out on some fitness gains. Recent research has found that athletes can increase their training by up to 50% for 8 weeks, with similar injury rates to athletes that use 10% for 13 weeks. So there's no scientific evidence supporting it, and it doesn't even mention intensity or cycling, so my conclusion is that this rule might be holding you back. Let me explain. With the caveat that I'm only adjusting how much training I do. How much fitness we can add is different for everyone, and it depends on past experiences and ability to recover. But if I follow a 10% per week training progression, my progression would go like this. Nice and steady, no matter how I'm feeling. Now, there's a few different options that we can choose as an alternative, but if I go wild and do as much intensity as I can handle without cracking, the progression might look something like this. And while I'm not saying that the second option will instantly make me fitter, if I'm able to do more work, under the right circumstances, this could lead me to greater fitness. There seems to be more upside with an approach like this. So this is the approach that I'm experimenting with. I've chosen to focus above threshold with my approach. So we're talking threshold training itself, then high intensity interval training, and then sprint interval training. Mainly because the progression underneath threshold is a different beast. You want to progress there and triangulate 3 metrics when you are below threshold. So heart rate, power, and RPE, how you feel. That's going to give you a better indication in ride as to whether you can extend it during that ride, so extending it 30, 60 minutes, whatever. But the focus I want to do, here's what it looks like. This training is incredibly simple once you get the gist of it. For each intensity level, there is a baseline. Then, based on how you feel on the day, you do as much extra work as you can, stopping when you fail. And that's it. That's the basis of this training. The rest of the information I cover is just details on how to set up your training and ideas on how to add more load. Let's look at how it works. So we need to maintain a minimum baseline to work from. That's why interval sessions have a minimum workload I'm calling the baseline. Duh. This is the minimum requirement for a session in terms of intensity and duration, and can build up from there. And the idea is that you do the minimum needed for that intensity, or the minimum recommended for that intensity in a test session, which is exactly what I'm doing now. I set my goal at 30 minutes. Let's see if I can get 30 minutes in. This first test session, you keep adding time at the same intensity until you fail to hold the prescribed power, which is 5% of continual power drop-off. This is my measure that indicates that you're nearing your capacity to perform. I just finished my effort and I got to about 34 minutes, it's about 33.50. I was aiming in the range of between 162 BPM and trying to keep it under 170. The road I was on was pretty steep, so it was kind of like popping me up all the time, and I was wanting to die at the end, but eventually I did drop down to that 162-ish and decided to call it. And so I've got 34 minutes as my baseline for the rest of this experiment. If you don't feel motivated during warm-up or after the first effort, I'll just do the minimum. In this case, 34 minutes, and call it a day. Nothing too revolutionary here, but it's the second part of the approach that gives you the freedom to adapt your training, and this gives you the potential to really progress your training much quicker and safer than the 10% rule. And this all starts with understanding failure. I'm just about to head out, so let me quickly explain failure. The type of failure that I'm talking about comes from a guy called Dr. Brent Rushall, who developed it for his swim training, where he talks about the concept of failure, but it's not what you think. Failure has a bad reputation in sport, and rightly so. No one wants to fail in competition. But in training, failure is actually a good thing. It means that you're pushing your limits. Rushall might have set 50 intervals in a single session, and the number of intervals completed is an indicator of an athlete's current fitness level. In other words, during a training session, if the athlete can't keep up with the intensity and say they get 33 out of 50, it's a sign that their training is on the right track. I'm not about to recommend that you do 50 reps of any interval. And anyway, this concept was developed to train groups of athletes at the same time. But this is what it looks like for me. If you're feeling ready, you can increase the load of your intervals. And to optimize each type of intervals, they have a slightly different approach to adding load. So starting with adaptive sprint interval training, if you want to progress there, just reduce the amount of recovery between efforts. Secondly, adaptive HIIT training. To progress here, you put more effort in. And the final one, adaptive threshold training. What I'm doing, I'm progressing by increasing the duration of the workouts and maintaining the same intensity. And this is how I am going to extend the intervals that I'm doing. If I'm feeling good, I'll do the minimum, and then I will go until I fail to hold the prescribed heart rate, which is a 5% drop from the top heart rate, and I will monitor this with an average lap field on my bike computer. So I'm just getting ready here to do my session, and the big thing that I'm thinking about right now is it my mind or my body that's telling me I don't want to do these? Because sometimes my mind tricks me into thinking that I shouldn't be doing any of these workouts, and I'm really fatigued, but I actually know that I'm not. My body feels pretty good. I had a general check in with all of it, so I'm ready to go. I'm at the end of my last rep, and I'm just starting to fade, even though the road starts to kick up a little bit from here. So hovering around 165, 164. Let's see how long I can hold it. I just pulled the pin on that final one. The funny thing was that the terrain started to kick up, so it gave me a couple of extra minutes actually, which was something that I didn't expect this morning, but welcome nonetheless, because I got probably about another 4 minutes. So I've done 4 sessions now, and seeing that having a baseline is really important, because in the third session, I didn't hit it. I wasn't feeling it. I wasn't mentally there and ready to hit it. But come the fourth, I was rolling on a high, and I hit an all-time high number. So I can really see why having the baseline is super important. So I'm just rolling back from one of the easiest sessions I've had yet, blowing past my baseline. But it's not always like this. Just because I nailed it today doesn't mean that I'll nail it tomorrow. Life gets busy, things get in the way, and sometimes you don't have the mental capacity to handle hard intervals. So that's where maybe fixed work is a bit of an advantage, because you have the work there, you know that you just have to get through that, rather than finding that little bit extra to push even though you've gone past the baseline. So I did it. It's over. 3 weeks of adaptive threshold intervals, and drum roll, I did more than 10% each week. Now, let's take a look at the data. I thought it was progressing nicely until I hit that third session. That third session really scared me, but then I was able to lift for the fourth session, which gave me a much closer increase to the first week. But after that point, it kind of just took off, and I hit 57% of a change the week after that. And I wasn't feeling so bad. That's the thing here. Okay, I was going to my limit, but I wasn't feeling like I had nothing left in the tank. I was able to ride after I had done my efforts. I averaged 42 minutes per session, and I rode a total of 254 minutes over the 3 weeks. This is a 28% increase over the 10% rule. Woohoo! So here's what I've learned. The baseline is a really good way of maintaining fitness and giving you a target when you're not mentally with it. You're not willing to push. Like there was that one session that I had that I wasn't able to push. But then having something on top of that, if you are ready, if you want to go harder, and these aren't heroic efforts. You do measure your efforts based on how you feel, but the ability to have that in your pocket and go as hard as you can or want to on the day, I think really is an advantage of this system. So I will be trying to use this, incorporating this into my riding, my coaching a little bit more, because I see it as a way of progressing training that still feels safe and manageable. And while there are down days, I think that the up days really do make up for it. I hope you like this video. It was a bit of a departure from my normal stuff, but I'm thinking about doing lots of 30-day experiments on this channel. So if you want to get more, click subscribe and turn on notifications for future videos. And you can also subscribe to my newsletter to get faster on the bike in 10 minutes a week. Oh, and write any ideas you have in the comments below. Thanks for watching and ride well.